In the depths of the library of never-ending stories is a chronicle of the battles between hope and despair. Within the tomes of this ancient archive are stories and secrets not yet revealed, but with each adventure, a new chapter is written. So ruler, awaken and journey into. Nero was lying on the floor, but the floor was wooden this time, covered with torn pages from countless books. He was back in the library. He looked around and the room curved. It was like a dream, like all of the other times. However, the decor had changed. Instead of neat sequences of books arranged by height and color on shelves or stacks of manuscripts carefully placed to form geometric structures, everything was scattered about. It was as if a battle had taken place there, and yet Nero felt no hostility. No magic lingered in the air, not of any kind. How strange, he thought. Every other time he had dreamed of this place, he had felt an arcane, powerful, mysterious magic radiating from everything around him. From the lecterns where books wrote themselves to the shelves where tomes seemed to pulse, as if alive. Everything had emanated a special kind of magic. Wrathful, ancient. But that day all was silent. "Hello?" He raised his voice as he stood up. The floor warped beneath him, but Nero had good control over his own dreams. "Is anyone there?" "Silence, young one." There was a voice that seemed to come out of nowhere. It was the same woman's voice he had grown used to hearing whenever he dreamed of that place. "There are ears everywhere." "Who are you?" Nero was trying to locate the source of the voice, and the woman appeared before him. She seemed surprised at the state of the library, glancing around in confusion, and Nero studied her. Her face made her appear young, but she seemed hundreds of years old, and after a soft sigh, she turned her attention back to him. "I am she who watches over time," said the woman, leaning toward Nero. Up close, he realized she stood over 2 meters tall. Yet surely because this was a dream, his perception of her was that she was rather small. "I need not see my name, Nero, for you already know it." Nero met her gaze and woke up suddenly in his bed. Scheherazade. By 2 in the afternoon, Nero was wandering through the gardens of the Raven's Order Academy, trying to put his thoughts in order. He had met the mistress of the library. Nero had no proof, but he knew she was the one meant to contact Flute. But it wasn't her she had contacted. It was him. Maybe Flute is right, and we really are the ones who... Nero quickly dismissed the idea. It was way too much for them. There were far more qualified people, professors, experienced warlocks. Even Principal Valiant himself was a better candidate to defeat the villain Flute wanted them to face. Without reaching any conclusion, Nero arrived at the fountain in the center of the garden. There, students from all years gathered to relax, eat, or practice magic duels, supposedly without teacher supervision. Sitting on a bench surrounded by a group of girls was Larinka. Nero pretended not to see her and quickened his pace. Ever since their descent into the catacombs, they hadn't spoken, and Nero didn't dare ask who she had killed to avoid killing him, though he suspected Larinka had ended her grandmother's life. The thought disturbed him so deeply that he couldn't bring himself to talk to her, not about that, but really not about anything. He had even begun to question whether or not he could still call her his friend, since he neither dared nor wanted to have any conversation with her at all. Besides, he wasn't the only one avoiding the other. Larinka had been waking up extremely early each day and leaving their room, only returning long after he had gone to bed. But she stood up and followed him, and with a few quick strides she caught up and cornered him against a tree. "Wow, you've gotten fast," unable to hide his surprise or the fact that he tried to leave her behind. "I've improved my physical abilities thanks to the pact, that's true. Larinka straightened her hair. It was tied up as always, and yet somehow looked twice as thick as usual. She stepped closer, and Nero began to notice the sweet scent that emanated from her, the same smell that lingered around the academy kitchens at any hour of the day. "Have you spoken with Symphony?" "The class rep? No, not at all." Nero became uneasy with his friend standing so close. "Then go find her. It's a warlock's matter, so hurry." Larinka stepped aside and adjusted her uniform. She didn't lift her head. Her eyes never met his. "Do you know where she might be?" "Try the teacher's room," Larinka said softly. Nero nodded, but both stood there for a moment, waiting, perhaps for the other to make the first move. But nothing happened. Larinka nodded faintly, hands clasped before her, and with a few small hops returned to the group of girls who had been sitting with her, leaving Nero alone, heart pounding in his chest. A little while later, Nero reached the door of the teacher's room. He thought about knocking, but since the door was already open, he simply peeked inside. Professor Pizzane was there, reading several documents at once. He was a broad-shouldered man with a heavy build, wearing gold-rimmed glasses, a loose robe, and several necklaces hanging from his neck. A geometrically shaped hat adorned his head, tilted to one side under the weight of numerous pendants engraved with intricate runic inscriptions. Professor Pizzane was an expert in observation magic, which allowed him to divide his attention as many times as he wished, to see far beyond what anyone else could. Sometimes he could even see things that had not yet happened. "Can I help you, young man?" Professor Pizzane, without looking up, had noticed Nero in the doorway. He hadn't made a sound, but Nero also hadn't crossed the threshold. "I'm looking for the class rep," but Nero stopped. That title was no longer correct. "No, I'm looking for, the warlock, Symphony. Is she here?" Professor Pizzane looked him up and down. The pendants on his hat jingled as they clinked together. He took off his glasses and wiped them on his robe. "Remarkable," said Professor Pizzane. "You have a great deal of potential, young man." "Me? No, not at all." "Don't be so modest, especially not falsely so. I dislike those who lack sincerity. Tell me, with which demon or demons have you forged your pact, boy?" Nero frowned. The professor tilted his head forward and peered at him over his gold spectacles. His eyes shifted in hue, turning reddish for an instant. "With the, Archdemon Barus, sir." "How interesting to see how little the youth of today know. You are unaware that one may forge pacts with more than one demon, provided the first follows, as in your case." Nero was hesitant, but resigned himself to the obvious. The professor was famous for knowing things no one else could possibly know, so he swallowed his embarrassment and spoke the truth. Yeah, that's right. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. So sit down." With a flick of his wrist, Professor Pizzane pulled out a chair and slid it across the room until it stopped before his desk. Nero, looking uneasy, obeyed. "What do you know of the first demons?" "Little, or rather nothing, honestly." The man stood, shaking the dust off his robes. He dragged his feet until he stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back. He coughed, his body slightly hunched, and suddenly Nero thought he looked much smaller than before. At the dawn of time, demons were not as they are now. Some bore wings and flew through the skies. Yet they were considered angels, fallen ones, yes, dark angels, with wicked hearts and malicious intent, and in due time, of course, there was rebellion. Many of those so-called demons were destroyed, though the demonic essence never truly vanishes, it merely transforms. The man made a theatrical gesture with one arm. A cloud of dust rose, covering the window and half the room. but instead of settling, it hovered in the air like a mist, solid and impenetrable. Then the true goddess Velma appeared. She split this dimension, Yomidgard, in two. She trapped the demons and extracted their infernal essences, turning them into what they are now. Creatures of pure malice, driven only by the will for absolute destruction. But she also divided the world itself, creating the Sea of Blood, making it impossible to travel from Axparin to Cathora. And now you may ask, why am I telling you this? Nero nodded. It was exactly the question he was about to ask. But not all demons succumb to the goddess Velma. No, some, the most powerful, manage to reincarnate into new forms. These are what we call the archdemons, but one among them all, not only regained his form, but stood against the goddess herself. And his name is still feared. Varkuzal, the devourer of gods. I think I've heard that name before. He felt a sudden itch in his mind. The same sensation as when one has a word on the tip of their tongue but can't quite recall or pronounce it. It's strange. Varkuzal and Velmar fought for weeks. The place where their battle took place was left utterly devastated. Hundreds of soldiers fought alongside the goddess Velmar, clashing against the horde of lesser demons that Varkuzal unleashed upon this land, and it was a true massacre. Today that place is known as the Bloodfire Battlefield of Yomidgard. A land where nothing grows and the soil remains forever scorched. It is also where Varkuzal fell, struck down by the holy light of the goddess Velmar. Then the dust that hung in the air finally dispersed, letting the dim light filter through the window. The man drew the curtains aside and opened a cabinet. From within he produced a demon's skull with 4 eye sockets and a serrated horn protruding from its forehead. Is that Varkuzal? Nero was staring into the skull's empty eyes. No, boy, Varkuzal was immense. 10 times larger than this entire building. But he could change his size at will, and the goddess Velmar used that very power against him. She severed his limbs and head, scattering them across Yomidgard. For even with all her divinity, she could not destroy him. The demon's head now roams, trapped in the size it was when he was defeated, forever seeking to reclaim its body. But, Professor, you still haven't told me why you're telling me any of this. Professor Pizzane turned toward him, his expression unreadable. He began to shake his head, but stopped halfway through the motion. Forces beyond understanding will soon recruit you for a fate greater than that of any mortal, boy. Before you sign your third pact, he will find you. It is inevitable. Nero jumped from his chair. It was another version of what Flute had told him, only far more direct and far more terrifying. I'm not making any more pacts with demons, nor getting involved in any destiny, or whatever it is you think the future has in store for me. Nero's fist became clenched. I wish I could believe you, young Nero. The person you were looking for has arrived. Come on in, Miss Symphony. The professor returned to his desk. But before Nero could reply, Symphony entered through the door, the professor gesturing toward him, and then burying his face again in his studies. Finally, I found you. Get ready. We leave tonight, said Symphony. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and a bandaged arm. What happened to you? Symphony didn't answer. Instead, she handed him a rolled parchment sealed with wax. The seal bore the crest of King Valgod himself. Nero took it carefully, realizing it was his official summons. King Valgod could command the service of any warlock in Silthmere without prior notice, and that seemed to be exactly what he was doing. Open it. It's your first mission. We depart tonight, you, Larinka, and me. By order of his infernal majesty, bound for Ravidra, one of the forgotten cities. Take everything you need for the journey and get ready. The mission won't be easy. What's the mission? Nero broke the seal. Indeed, the parchment contained the same order Symphony had spoken aloud, with one addition, the mission's true objective. Oh, for a flower? Ambrosia, the divine fruit, an intriguing task indeed. Professor Pizzane was clearly eavesdropping. You know of it, Professor? Of course, my dear Symphony. Ambrosia is the only plant ever planted by the goddess Velmar herself. It allows any Velmardian to attune with the goddess, elevating their divinity to unprecedented heights. It should be extinct. If His Majesty, Master Valgot, sends you to retrieve one, it is likely the last that exists in all of Yomidgard. Nero read the parchment again. There was a section Symphony hadn't mentioned, one that spoke of an enemy war party after the same objective, already ahead of them. Velmardians? But Symphony was no longer there to answer. Along with the parchment, she had left him a document detailing the rendezvous time and location, and every instruction needed to fulfill his duty as a warlock. Professor Pizzane waved his hand, and a sudden gust of wind pushed Nero out of the room. The door slammed shut in his face the moment he stepped outside, leaving him alone with his first official mission now begun. Nero arrived at the academy gates as night fell. This time his luggage was much lighter. He had learned his lesson after his descent into the catacombs. He carried only what he considered essential, far less than last time. Larinka was already there, standing beside Symphony, and both were waiting next to a demonic carriage. A vehicle forged with the Academy's ancient magic, a blasphemous yet remarkably useful blend of tech and sorcery. The carriage itself was a demon, and no beast drew it. The entity inhabiting it was the one turning the wheels, acting as its engine. Such carriages were exceedingly rare to see, for traveling across Axburn's surface was akin to shouting for danger and catastrophe to come find you. The carriage is impressive. Nero had just arrived and couldn't help but exclaim, trying to break the ice. You took your time, said Symphony, indifferent to his attempt at conversation. Well, now that the four of us are here, we can finally depart. The four of us? Professor Morgana, of course. She's waiting inside the carriage, said Larinka, taking a bite from an apple. She carried her enchanted paper bag again, filled to the rim with whatever she pleased. Its interior expanded by a spell, while its outward size remained unchanged. Nero nodded and stepped into the carriage. As he touched the door frame, a sticky sensation clung to his hand. He was entering the living interior of a demon. The walls pulsed faintly, though the air didn't reek of entrails as he had expected. It smelled of old leather and cleaning products. The oppressive awareness of being inside a living creature didn't fade, but at least the atmosphere wasn't so different from a conventional horse-drawn carriage. On one of the seats, strapped by a belt to a cloth bag, sat Professor Morgana's doll. Her presence there meant she would accompany them in the essence, but not in her body, just as she had done during the descent into the catacombs. Makes sense, since we're warlocks now, thought Nero. She doesn't need to keep a close eye on us anymore. It comforted him to know a professor would still accompany them on their first mission, but it also made him feel like a child still riding with training wheels. Come on, sit. Velmardians have a head start, but we'll take a shortcut through a place no one dares to tread. It'll cut several days off our journey. Through where? Asked Nero. He sat in the empty seat, hoping Larinka would sit beside him, but she chose the seat across, leaving Symphony to sit at his side. Are you afraid of demon stories? Said Symphony, raising an eyebrow. We're literally inside one. And you won't mind that we're taking the shortcut through the Bloodfire battlefield of Yomidgard, said Symphony, knocking on the carriage ceiling. The locks slid shut on their own. Something roared outside, and the carriage lunged forward at full speed, leaving the academy behind. Nero grimaced, and Symphony smirked defiantly. Any problem? Nero shook his head. Nero shook his head, but still he couldn't ignore the tingling crawling up his arm. The blood-fire battlefield of Yomagard, the place from Professor Pizzane's story, the place where Varkuzal had fallen. The professor's premonition was beginning to take shape.